Hello, my name is Ray.
Hi, this is Michael.
Welcome to another episode of Ray's Economics Clue Book. Today, we're talking about economic growth and productivity.
Yeah.
So we're talking about economic growth, we talk about labor productivity, and we talk about long-run economic growth and real economic growth.
Sure.
So there's two ways to really interpret it conventionally. One is through the PPF graph. Basically, PPF graph compares two arbitrary goods in an economy, look at their production and the opportunity cost of producing both compared to the other. And we see real economic growth, we see the PPF expand outwards, and that would represent real economic growth will always involve the PPF expanding outwards. And you see here, a shift to the right, increase supply of both capital consumer goods, or maybe just one of the goods. For instance, the good could expand to the right or expand upwards, or it can do both at the same time. And so, of course, how this happens? It happens because of labor productivity increases, overall productivity or productivity per unit of labor.
Yeah.
So basically, when physical capital and human capital per labor increases, one or both, technology level increases, or technology levels increase, then the labor productivity increases overall.
Yeah, so that basically is even if the labor participation rate remains the same, labor productivity could increase due to different factors, for example, physical capital or human capital or technology improvements.
So, of course, the more traditional way to look at it perhaps would be the ADSM model. We talked about last time, we talked about the short-run aggregate supply curve and the long-run aggregate supply curve. Short-run aggregate supply curve shifts due to perhaps change in prices and costs, input costs perhaps, and because it's a change in prices, the real economic growth in the long run will largely stay the same. However, the long-run aggregate supply curve is not based off of price or cost or inflation. Basically, it's real economic growth, real output growth, and so it's not based off prices or things like that. It's based off of labor productivity. Basically, productivity, increased productivity or productive potential, either per unit of labor or per unit input or overall productivity. If it increases, then we see the LRAS or the long-run aggregate supply curve shift to the right because an overall supply capacity is increased.
Yeah, as we actually discussed for many times about the ADS model, which is, I would say, the most important component in the macroeconomics. We discussed that technology improvement usually lead to a right shift for the long-run aggregate supply curve, right? But basically, in today's discussion, we also bring in, for example, labor productivity increase could also lead to the right shift of the long-run aggregate supply curve, right? Not just technology improvement. For example, human capital improvement, for example, right? Physical capital improvement, etc.
And of course, an increase in overall labor participation rate can also increase our overall raw total of our long-run aggregate supply. Even though our per capita productivity or output may not change, our overall real GDP can increase.
Yeah, yes.
And so finally, look at the aggregate production function. Aggregate production function, this graph, based on representation of the function y output equals t technology times PC to the alpha, or physical capital to the alpha, times human capital to 1 minus alpha. And alpha is an arbitrary number based off of, that differs basically per region, per nation almost. In the US, the alpha values are about 0.25 to 0.33, which shows that human capital in a developed nation like the US, and an advanced nation perhaps economically like the US, is more important, while physical capital may be more influential in a less developed or less advanced economic region. And so, as a result, we see here, if technology, physical capital or human capital increase, then our overall output in our aggregate production function goes up compared to amount of capital stock we have.
So that basically this graph actually basically captures the overall picture right here, because real GDP increase, for example, could be led by technology improvement, could be human capital improvement, or even could be workforce improvement, for example, labor participation rate. More people get into work, for example, right? And by capital capital stock increase. Right now, in this curve, we just say, hey, capital stock is just fixed. If given the same, we can still see real GDP increase. But we can see, of course, with the capital stock increase, our real GDP also increase, right? Okay.
So overall, what we need to remember is that labor productivity is the key, or basically the main driver of real economic growth. Because more physical capital, human capital, or technology level per unit labor improves productivity. And even as Michael mentioned, as I mentioned too, even before that, increases in the labor force will increase overall real GDP. Real GDP per capita may not increase necessarily because the increase in labor force often seen with an increase in population, although not necessarily. But overall, real GDP will increase no matter what in all of these factors.
Yes. In our history, actually, we can see that basically, for example, the baby boomers, right? The baby boomers period that actually more than average people getting to work. So the overall real GDP increased, much more faster, much faster than the historical average number. And also, for example, in the year of 2000, the technology improvement also significantly improved the GDP growth under the Bill Clinton administration. So we also see that the technology improvement is a key part to drive economic growth. So overall, the economic growth, real, we are discussing the real economic growth is mainly driven by labor productivity and the labor participating rate. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but labor productivity is our real focus here.
Yeah.
As Ray already mentioned, that's technology improvement, physical capital improvement, and human capital improvement are all the fundamental keys to drive the labor productivity.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye bye.